everyone, welcome to the first episode of Beneath the Waves, where we dive into the lives and journeys of inspiring leaders who are making a massive impact and shaping the world today. Today, I'm thrilled and excited to welcome Matt Wallaert. He is a behavioral scientist, an innovator, and most importantly, he is the newly appointed Chief Experience Officer at Oceans. From his groundbreaking projects like Get Raised to his liking for Legos and cowboy boots, Matt is a person of many facets. Matt, welcome to Oceans and welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here. So Matt, how we've broken this conversation up is into a few pieces. Like the first segment is I want to dive into your brain. I want to understand how you think, what your future plans are for the world kind of thing.
Dive into my brain? I don't know how I feel about that.
I work for Oceans. I had to use the word dive. So before we get to that, this is your first time in Sri Lanka, right?
It is. I've traveled extensively in the region. And so when I left home at like 15, I went to high school in Hong Kong.
Oh, wow.
So I got introduced to Asia at a very early age. I got to travel all over, but I've never been to Sri Lanka. So this is like a first time. I've been here for 10 days. I'm exhausted, but it is amazing. Everything about it is amazing. I've had such a great time.
Oh, I'm glad. Is there anything that stood out, like a favorite experience or impression or anything like that?
I mean, it feels kind of trite, but you can't not talk about the food. I mean, I had about 6 egg hoppers for dinner last night because it was delicious. I got to go out to dinner with my diver.
Oh, lovely.
So after working together for 2 years, I finally got to come say hi, and she and her husband and I all went out for dinner, and it was delicious. From a experience perspective, I'm a social psychologist by training, so the people part is always the part that excites me about a place. I love that Sri Lanka has its own really distinctive culture. I think a lot of times, it just hangs right off the bottom of India. So in people's mind, it's just India. It's very much not just India, right? And so I love the sort of unique flavor of the people here. Whenever I'm not, at work, I'm walking around, I'm watching things. The Sri Lankan teams all think I'm kind of crazy because Sri Lankans are like, what are you walking in this heat and this humidity? And I'm like walking everywhere because I just want to see things and experience the people and be part of the culture.
I just want to say on his first day here, he walked all the way from his hotel, Cinnamon Grand, all the way to Cinnamon Red at 12 p.m.
Okay, I would just like to talk about the fact that all the way was a 10-minute walk. It was not like an hour. This was not miles, multiple kilometers. I could see my hotel from the other hotel, right? I walked within walking distance between 2 buildings. This is a relatively normal thing. I just don't fit into Sri Lanka.
Next time you come here, I'll be also doing that.
You ready? We're going to walk. Next time we'll do a walking interview. I like this. Walk and talk.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, it's hard to film, but it's fun to do.
But carpools are so last year. Maybe that's the new thing to do.
All right, I like it.
I love it.
We can do tuck pools.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Tuck pool karaoke. Yeah.
I love it. Matt, just diving into your professional journey. You are a behavioral scientist.
Yep.
What inspired you to get into that field?
Yeah, so I am a social psychologist by training. So if you think about psychology, right, there's a sort of clinical split that focus on the individual, and then there's a set of disciplines that focus on groups of people or people as they exist, not individual people, but the way that everyone is. And so social psychology sort of fits in there. I loved academia. I love teaching. I love research. But one of the things that academia tends to observe the world as it is, and I really wanted to make the world different. I want to change things in the world. I wanted to be an applied scientist. And so I left academia, and that's really when I started my career in business and started doing startups and building and selling things. But that was all related to this opportunity to actually do applied science, to use science as a methodology to change things in the world. And then, of the things to change, I think behavior is the interesting one. I think the point of everything is to change behavior. Even this conversation, right? We're recording it, other people can watch it, and our hope is that they do something different because they saw it, right? Communication is a behavior change mechanism. Yeah. So for me, that just sort of defined the rest of my career. And so for the last 20 years or so, that's what I've been doing.
Lovely. Understanding how people work from like a scientific lens is super interesting. That's something I'm really interested in. I'm guessing you are too. And I think when it comes to being a leader, that really helps you get a better perspective of your team. So how has being a behavioral scientist helped you become a better leader in the corporate world?
I mean, I think Well, one of the challenges of leadership is that people tend not to think about it as a behavioral challenge, right? So you'll hear leaders talk about winning hearts and minds, right? I'm not winning hearts and minds. I'm winning hands. I'm winning behavior. I'm winning what people are doing. A really easy example is inclusion. It's really easy to say, well, I want everybody to be more inclusive.
Yeah.
What does that physically, literally mean? What do you want people to do? You want men to shut up in meetings so that women have space to talk? Cool. Like that's a physical, literal behavior that we can go make more likely in the world. And so a lot of my leadership is informed by, hey, there are a set of behaviors that are going to make us successful, and we collaboratively are working on the conditions, the situation, the environment that makes those behaviors more likely. So I'm not managing individual people, I'm managing an environment that allows those people to be successful.
Right. Okay. That's a really interesting take. That's nice. Okay. Were there any pivotal moments in your career that significantly shaped your outlook on work and leadership?
I mean, one of the earliest pivotal points in my career actually occurred in college. And this was sort of when I knew, hey, I might want to go be an applied scientist.
Okay.
So I was in a class where we were reading a study, and I didn't argue with the methodology of the study, but I felt like the authors were overreaching in their conclusion, meaning the evidence didn't support the conclusion that they were drawing.
Okay.
And so I sort of said this to my professor, and he said, well, the field agrees that this is appropriate evidence for this conclusion. But the great thing about science, Matt, is, if you disagree, you can come run an experiment, generate new evidence that shows that that is not an appropriate conclusion. And that was probably the first time in my life that anybody had really said, hey, there's an orderly way to respond to something that you disagree with, and that's to gather evidence, right? Before that, you always sort of get taught that it's about power or affluence or, the most articulate person wins the argument, like law, right? Think about every legal procedural thing you've ever seen, right? It's all about some eloquent lawyer making a better argument than somebody else. But science isn't that. Science is, can you find the evidence that brings us collectively closer to the truth? And that was huge for me. And it really has informed everything I've done in my career, because evidence is the great leveler, right? It doesn't care whether you're, female identifying or male identifying, whether you're high status or low status, whether you're from the US or from Sri Lanka. Evidence doesn't care, right? I love that about science, because it means that anyone from any walk of life can contribute to the dialogue, can contribute to our advancement, can contribute to us becoming different than we are. And that for me is really, really important.
Lovely. So in this conversation, I have a few fun questions that I've hidden in between all the serious big questions.
Well, that's terrible, because I am no fun. I'd just like to say, for the record, not any fun. Good at leadership, not so good at fun.
Having known you for about 2-3 weeks, I don't agree with that. So to the first fun question, what's one lesser known fact about yourself that you think is going to surprise the people who are watching?
One lesser known fact about myself. Wow. I mean, there's a lot of, I wear cowboy boots every day. A lot of people know that. I box every day, right? That's maybe that.
Nice. Okay.
Maybe that's a more fun one. Here you go. Here's a lesser known one. So during the pandemic, obviously, I couldn't go to the gym and box anymore, right? Because nobody could go anywhere. And so I got into VR boxing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I box in VR every day. Thrill of the Fight 2, which is by far the best multiplayer boxing simulator that just came out a couple months ago. So if you are a boxer or if you have a VR headset, if you download Thrill of the Fight 2, you may actually get to fight me. I will not tell you my username, but the avatar kind of looks like me, so you might be like, aha,
nice.
Fighting Matt Wallaert in VR.
That's quite interesting.
We'll see. Maybe next time I'm here, we'll do a diver challenge, and we'll bring
not?
some VR headsets, and you can get a chance to punch the boss. I like this plan.
Well, I like that plan. I really like it. Okay, Matt. I'm going to look at the laptop here because there's some important stuff that I don't want to get wrong. So you've worked on some truly inspiring and impactful side projects like Get Raised and Mediocre White Men. For those of you who don't know, Get Raised is a remarkable initiative. Matt has helped underpaid women collectively ask for and earn over $3.6 billion in salary increases. That's amazing.
Just to be fair, Matt and team,
okay.
Right? If you want to go far, go with others, right?
The team. Lovely.
So yeah, we built, after the first company I ever worked at, which was founded by two really great guys, Avi and Ori, was in the personal finance space, and we exited to LendingTree, and it was a great acquisition, and there were lots of things to be happy about. You're always glad, when your startup gets acquired, but there were parts of it that felt like a loss to us. One of the mistakes that we made, and I was the head of product, so it was my mistake, was we really only looked at how to manage your money once you had it, right? So we looked at everything that happened after you get a paycheck. And the problem is, if you're looking at, sort of many of the gender, ethnicity, other kinds of gaps that occur, they don't occur after you get your money. They occur before you get your money, right? They're actually pay gaps. Yeah. And so that led us to, after the acquisition, we want to build something in this space. So we built Get Raised on this very simple premise that for any given behavior, there are promoting pressures, things that make a behavior more likely, inhibiting pressures, things that make a behavior less likely. And a lot of things that focus on empowering women are focused on promoting pressures. You got to want it more, right? You got to lean in. Yeah. Well, it turns out that no woman wants to be underpaid. There's no woman wandering around being like, you know what, I hope men get paid more than I do, right? It's not a promoting pressure problem. It's an inhibiting pressure problem. I don't know how to ask. I'm not sure what will happen if I ask. How much do I ask for? All of those things. So we built a product that was really, really focused on how do we just make it as easy as possible for women to ask for and get raises. And that was really, really useful for us. And so being really religious about what we tried to do, scoping it down to just this part of the problem, turned out to be really effective. And over the course of the 10 years or so that we kept it up and running, it was very effective.
How does it feel to know that you've made tangible impact on people's lives?
So in my non-neurotypicality, right, everybody's different in some way. My partner often points out that I am very temporally located, meaning I can't remember what happened a week ago and I don't know what's happening a week from now, right? I just am very located in the moment. So I have to say for me, I forget about Get Raised all the time. I forget about many of the projects that I've run over time because I'm always very focused in that moment what I'm doing to improve this situation. It also is, for things like Get Raised, anytime you work on a social issue, it's hard because while you make progress, for sure, $3.6 billion in raises is progress. We're happy about that. That's great. It also highlights how far you have to go. Yeah. And, we go through these regressions in human society, right? If you zoom out, it's up and to the right. Things are better than they were 1,000 years ago, better than they were 10,000 years ago, at least when we talk about gender and ethnicity and things. But locally, in the moment, things can go into some serious regressions, right? And things are not looking great, right, for women in the world right now across many, many countries. And so as much progress as I make forward, there's always these reminders of, gosh, there's just so much work left to do here. And just, we've got to work harder. And so being temporally located, I just try to, what am I doing today to further the mission? What am I doing today to get things where I need to go? Forget what I've done, because at the end of the day, it didn't solve the problem. There's still more problems to solve. And try not to look too far forward because that can be demoralizing. I mean, if you look at how far we still have to go to get to gender equity, that can be, tough. And so I just try to stay very focused in what needs to happen right now to take that next incremental step, to get that next level forward to where we need to be.
Nice. The next question I have is around mediocre white men. But before I jump into that, you mentioned that as heading product at your previous place, you made a mistake. How do you look at mistakes, and what piece of advice would you like to give our viewers who are mostly in the beginning of their career or midpoint in their careers? How do you rectify it? How do you look past it? How do you become better from these mistakes that you made? Yeah,
for me, a lot of it's about that temporal location, right? It's not, if you're going to beat yourself up about it, beat yourself up for a short term and then move on, right? You have to be willing to move on with your life. All of us make mistakes, right? Everywhere, all the time, I make mistakes. I have a 9-year-old. Having a 9-year-old is a constant progression of realizing that you are a suboptimal parent. I think one of the things that happens sometimes is that people, when they recognize that they're suboptimal, they think that means they're bad, right? And there's a difference between bad and suboptimal. I live in a suboptimal world. That's part of being a product person, is seeing there's always something that could be improved, right? I can reinvent this light. I can reinvent this microphone. I can do a different thing with a laptop. I can always improve things. But that doesn't mean this microphone is bad, that light is bad, that laptop is bad. It just means I believe they can be better.
That's true.
And so for me, that's how I get through mistakes, is try and remember that it's not about me being good or bad. It's just a recognition that I can always make things better, and that's actually to be celebrated. If you imagine a world where everything was optimal, everything was the best possible version, what a fucking boring world, right? Like, it's just, there's nothing to do there, right? I believe very passionately in the dichotomy between the Star Trek future and the Idiocracy future. So there's a movie, Idiocracy, right, that sort of says everything gets automated and humans just sort of sit on the TV, sit on the couch and watch TV, and it's like the lowest common denominator of television, right? And then there's another version of the future where, in Star Trek, they have solved human sufficiency because they can make matter out of energy, and they have unlimited sources of energy in the form of dilithium crystals, right? So there's this idea that like all human sufficiency things are solved. But they have a different vision of what happens because of that, right? It doesn't end up in Idiocracy. They go out and explore the universe, and there's like, this innate thing in people that is about making the world better and different and exploring. And so I try to look at mistakes the same way. They're just an invitation into the infinite. There's a great, I'm not religious as a person, but there's this great quote from a science fiction author and fantasy author where he said, one of the reasons that he's not religious, he said, I'd rather be a rising ape than a falling angel. And I've always thought that was very poignant about like, my mistakes aren't a movement away from perfection, right? They're an evolution away from what I was. And that we all are evolving. And to me, that's very hopeful.
I love that. That's a really, really nice answer. And that quote, I love it. Really nice. I might actually print it out. It is religiously inaccurate because at least in Christianity, humans are not fallen angels. But it is a nice reminder to me that like we have the capacity to build on ourselves. And humans are very unique in our ability to be explicit and conscious about that. I mean, lots of animals improve, but as far as we know, they're not conscious of improving, right? Whereas humans, I can watch myself get a little better every day. And that is such a hopeful thing for me. Maybe part of it's being a parent, right? Because you get to watch that externalized to yourself and at a growth rate that you are well past, right? At 42, I am not growing at the rate that my 9-year-old is growing, right? But it really, for me, is I'm a fundamentally hopeful person. Oh, I love that. We all should be. Mediocre white men. I love it. It blends humor with behavioral science and sparks a lot of important conversations about representation, equity, privilege, and stuff like that. Why do you think humor is an effective tool for addressing such big issues in the world?
Yeah, I mean, so there has been actually more recently a lot of behavioral science about sort of the behavior change possibility of humor, which I love. If I had more time, I would love to use stand-up comedy as a way of like teaching people about science. I think humor is, it's that spoonful of sugar, right? Idea from Mary Poppins, right? A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, right? If one of the unique purposes of humor, the right kind of humor and good humor, is that it allows us to look at a mirror, right? Understand some of the mistakes we're making, but in a way that doesn't encourage us to have judgment, right? We talked earlier about when you make mistakes, it's that possibility to be a rising ape. Humor helps us do that because, we can simultaneously see the ways in which we're suboptimal. Humor is always about suboptimality. We can see the ways that we're suboptimal while also acknowledging that that doesn't make us bad and it doesn't have to be sad or fearful or angry or any of the negative emotions that we sometimes associate with failure, right? It can be an opportunity to change.
Nice. With Get Raised and Mediocre White Men, they seem so different on the surface, but they're actually tied together by a common thread or like common foundation of equity, empowerment, and challenging the status quo, basically, right? How do you come up with these kind of ideas? Is there something that goes off in your brain, or was there like an inspiration, like a moment, or something you saw in front of your eyes that inspired these things?
In terms of inspiration, that always comes from lived experience for me. And as a scientist, it often comes from something unexplainable in the data or some desire to understand why something is the way it is. For Get Raised, it was very simple. At the first company, we had tons of people's financial data. And the way that we had conceptualized savings rate was we didn't just want rich people to get a high score and poor people to get a low score. So we said, well, how much are you saving as a function of your income, right? It's all about how are you using the resources that are available to you? And when you look at it that way, women actually kick the shit out of men. They're much better savers on a per dollar basis than men are. The problem is, as soon as you take out the as a function of what you earn, men just save more raw dollars because they're making 20 to 50% more than women are for the same jobs. And so that was a very clear data challenge to here's the problem, we need to go address this thing. And you're always failing forward, right? So Get Raised was awesome in that it helped women ask for and get raises, but didn't address the fundamental problem, which was that they were underpaid in the first place, right? So you're like, great, I get women a bunch of raises, but I'm failing because women are the one who are having to ask for the money that they should have already been paid, right? And so I'm always trying to fail forward, right? I look at every product and go, well, what did I do wrong and how do I fix it with the next product? And so Mediocre White Men, I think I was having a conversation with a woman and she was talking about psychological safety. We were talking about the concept and philosophy of psychological safety. And I was sort of struck by the original quote, Mediocre White Men, has to do with this quote that God give me the confidence of a mediocre white man, right? Which is said by a wonderful black woman. And I was like, oh man, I love this quote. But it's interesting, right? Where does that confidence come from? So there's two competing explanations, right? One version is mediocre white men are confident because they know that there is reduced penalty for failure, right? Okay. So the inhibiting pressure that we talked about is low, right? If they make a mistake, it's going to be forgiven. It's no big deal. They'll be able to move on, right? That's the sort of one version of the overconfidence of mediocre white men. The other version is they misunderstand how good they are. So it's not that they think that if they fail, it won't matter. It's that they think they won't fail because they're so good, right? So they're overestimating their abilities. And so that particular study was about, that's a fascinating, I wonder where this mediocre white man confidence comes from. A lack of consequences or overconfidence of their abilities. Turns out to be both, by the way. They are both overconfident about their abilities and feel psychologically safe all the time because they think their mistakes won't matter. Of the two, however, though, psychological safety seems to be the bigger one. Okay. Men are relatively certain that mediocre white men feel like if I screw up, I'll probably still be fine. Yeah. That's not a thing that other people are walking around feeling. And so that's where we have more opportunity to do something.
I read somewhere, Matt, that you like cowboy boots and Legos, which are distinctively different preferences. So if you had to choose, would you rather design a Lego set or a pair of custom cowboy boots?
Ooh, that is a really hard question. So the Lego piece is, I do not do well with blank slate creativity. If you hand me a piece of white paper and a pen, I'm like, right, I'm not good at drawing to begin with, and I don't have that sort of blank slate creativity. Where my creativity is very much like, I have MacGyver creativity. If you were like, make a piece of art out of everything on this table, great. I have the pieces, and I can summon something out of that. That's that MacGyver creativity of what in your environment can you use, but the blank slate stuff is just not for me. So I love that about Legos, right? They sort of invite you into a space, but with some scaffolding that makes it easier for you.
With some guidelines.
Yeah, with some scaffolding. The thing that's really interesting about that question, Legos versus cowboy boots, is the cowboy boots would be for me, and the Legos would almost certainly be for somebody else, right? For the world. Yeah. So I'm tempted to make the Lego set just because it's something that can be commoditized, right? I'm not into custom stuff. I wear almost entirely used clothing.
Right.
So I buy everything on eBay. I figured out early in my career that I didn't really care about clothing, and that wasn't a thing that was going to be important to me. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be important to others. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think God bless all the people that love style. That's awesome. It's just not me. So I just ordered a bunch of used clothing on eBay, and then I tried it on until I found things that fit off the rack, and then I just started wearing those. So I've been wearing John Varvatos 40R blazers, fit reasonably well off the rack, and you can get one on eBay for $20.
Wow.
I've just been wearing them for years, and so that's the cowboy boots are all used. So all you people who think you might want to wear cowboy boots, let me explain the secret of cowboy boots. Rich people buy expensive cowboy boots because they think they're going to wear cowboy boots. But the problem with cowboy boots is you got to break them in. They're not practical for everything. And so lots and lots of rich people buy expensive cowboy boots, never break them in, and then they get resold. you can get some really nice cowboy boots, right? If you that are like have been worn twice, you got to be willing to break them in. You got to be willing to soften them up with some leather softener, but you can get some really nice cowboy boots.
Nice. I really like the fact that you said cowboy boots are for yourself, but Legos would be for someone else. It's a really interesting thought. I'll come back to that later, but we're moving into the second segment, which is about oceans.
Oh, hey.
Matt, you've joined the team as the Chief Experience Officer.
Maybe. I would like to point out, Ian and Austin, if you're watching, decide what my title is. Nobody knows, but we know what I do, so that's a good first start.
Well, Ian and Austin, I've decided we're going as Chief Experience Officer. Before we dive into your plans as a CXO and whatever for Oceans, what drew you to Oceans and what made you believe in this company?
Yeah, so I do believe relatively passionately in the company, and part of it is the Sri Lankan people, but part of it is also, I think, Ian's vision. So Ian and I have known each other for a really long time. My son thinks of him as Uncle Ian. He lived in my building in New York at one point, right? Like we are very close. We play board games together all the time. And so when he first started the company, I was one of his sort of first stops, and we had a conversation, and we were talking about, how we met. So I am from very rural Oregon. Ian is from rural Vermont. And we both are country boys at heart. We love to be out in nature. We love to be in our home states. We both have a lot of home state pride. But we met in New York City, a city that we both don't particularly love living in or being around. And a lot of why that happened was because that's where economic opportunity was. Okay. It turns out, like, living in rural Oregon, it's really tough to be a startup executive. Easier now, right, with remote work and things. But, when I started, you kind of had to move to a city. And look, I think if somebody is born in Kandy and has to move to Colombo for economic opportunity, it's not the worst thing in the world, right? Because they can go home on weekends. It's not that big of an island, right? But nobody should have to leave their home country to get economic opportunity. And so, Ian talked about his vision of bringing, really good, high quality jobs into the Sri Lankan market to people who, otherwise would have to emigrate to get them. Yep. And to me, that's just so compelling because I love the idea of a Sri Lankan Matt Wallaert who doesn't have to leave their equivalent of Oregon, right? Doesn't have to go to New York City to get a job. So I'm not saying immigration is bad. If people want to come to the U.S., I want them to come. I want us to be a nation of immigrants. I want that vibrancy that comes when you get diverse people together. But it should be a choice. No one should feel pressured to do that. No one should have to do that. I was talking to a diver about prior to Oceans. She and her husband were talking about potentially having to do a long distance relationship. Well, one of them left the country in order to be able to get the kind of economic opportunity that would then allow them to be together again. And that's just heartbreaking, right? Whether you're leaving your family or whether you're leaving a loved one or whether you're just leaving a country that you love. Nobody should have to leave for economic opportunity. And so I think we're really committed to Sri Lanka, really committed to the people of Sri Lanka. But that vision of being able to stay where you are and work is very compelling to me.
Matt, you were one of our early adopters. Mm-hmm. You had a diver from us.
Yeah, Melanie.
Yeah,
Melanie was my diver. Melly.
Exactly, from very, very early on. I think she was part of Oceans way before I was even part of Oceans. What has stood out about the Oceans talent pool?
Yeah, I think in some ways it's what doesn't stand out, right? It's just like working with somebody that's sitting next to you. It's just like working, it's like working with another remote American, right? That is an amazing experience to be able to then say, hey, can we take this really high level relationship that you have with a colleague and make it accessible anywhere in the world? That's really awesome to me. So, lots of our clients give lots of compliments about how amazing, our Sri Lankan talent is and how amazing our divers are. But to me, the most amazing part is just how it seems totally natural that they would be your colleague, right? That's really the great point. It's like, we talked earlier about inclusion, right? The first step on any inclusive pathway is working with somebody of difference, right? Whatever that difference is, different gender, different religion, But the really magical part of inclusion is the part where you stop thinking about that bit, right? Where that part doesn't even matter anymore, where your diver isn't a diver, it's just a person that you work with on a daily basis, and it doesn't matter that they're Sri Lankan, and it doesn't matter that they're somewhere across the world. You're just in the flow of working together. And that part has always, always, always blended in for me. Stood out by blending in.
Oh, I love that. I remember during one of our chats a few days ago, you said your diver is the right hand to the founder for you, but she doesn't do a lot of like the EA plus role, like job tasks that people usually do. How did you recognize her talent, and how do you make the most of it, and what kind of work does she do for you?
Yeah, I think I never, either of my two divers, I've never expected them to do calendar management or inbox management or those things. I can manage those things myself. I also think that they are, I think it's important to have dignified, meaningful work for anybody in a workplace. And I think, I don't know, managing my calendar, I'm not sure how dignified that is. Like, I can do that. And eventually AI will do it. And so I never started with the assumption of, hey, this person is going to be an EA to me. Instead, I always started from a perspective of what do they feel like they are strong at? What do they feel like they know? What do they think they can, how do they think they can bring value? And then collaboratively worked for, well, in the set of things that I need, where should we start? Where can we lean into your strengths? But then it's a growth process, right? So then you're saying, okay, well, you're doing these things for me. Here's where I need you to take on something that might be uncomfortable for you, right? But that's going to bring high value to us. The other thing I'll say is it's incredibly important for a diver that they understand your outcome-based goals, right? Too often, when we talk about the human versus tool dichotomy there, right? Tools are process-oriented. So I don't dictate to my divers a process. Here's how I want you to do the thing. I say, here's what I want to be true when you're done doing the thing. Now find a way to do it. Okay. And if you want my advice as a peer on how I would do it, I'm happy to record a little loom and show you, well, this is how I would do it. But you can do it however you want, right? Like,
as long as the outcome is what you've expected.
Yeah, it's that accountable autonomous, right? I have to tell you, hey, here's how I'm going to hold you accountable. Here's the outcome that I believe in. And then I have to give you the autonomy to accomplish that in the way that's going to be best for you. And that's true of managing my diver leadership team and what we call the lighthouse team, the people that are inside the corporate part of Oceans, and that's managing a diver. And it's the same respect that I would hope that someone else would give me, right? It's the same respect Ian gives me. Hey, here are the things that need to happen. Go figure it out yourself, Matt.
Interesting. You've been working behind the scenes with Ian, our CEO and founder, for a long time now, from the inception of Oceans. But now that you've taken on the role as Chief Experience Officer, and now you're in front of the camera, basically, what is your vision for Oceans as the CXO, and how do you see your role evolving?
I think that one of the things that's really important in any business is, as you go through sort of the epochs of a business, the things that got you here aren't the things that will get you there, right? We have about 500 divers at this point, and, you can get to 500 divers on just grit, right? Google Sheets and a lot of hard work can get you this far. But in this next tranche, and the reason that I came out from, behind the camera, in front of the camera, is really starting to get to the place of, well, where do we lay the foundation that takes us from 500 to 5,000? Like, where do we lay the foundation that allows us to be in this next version of the business, as it were? And so a lot of what I'm doing right now is, the first part of that has to be people. So I'm working with our leadership team. We're changing the organizational structure. We're making sure those accountable, autonomous zones are really clear. You want people to be collaborative, but they also have to know what they own and what they're responsible for. So clarifying in the beginning of a startup, everybody's doing everything all of the time. And that has some virtue and some magic. But when you're trying to scale something, you have to get to a place where, people are in charge of things, right? They're accountable for those things because, that's how you do performance management. That's how you look for new opportunities. That's how you create growth pathways. Yeah. And so for me, it's a lot of that. And that, I think, is going to trickle down to divers as well. So things like, I want every diver to have a documented growth pathway. What do they want to do? Right? And we talk about actually 4 kinds of growth pathways. So one of them is external. I want to be the queen of the tooks, right? I want to get a fleet of took drivers, and in Colombo, I'm going to be the next kangaroo cabs, right? Cool. What are we doing to set you up for that experience, right? How are we introducing you to a client that is in that space? How are we mentoring you to give you those skills? How can we take what you're doing and show you how that's going to teach you? Then there are lighthouse goals. We always want to be recruiting from within when we can, and I think that that's really important for any business. You want to see people scale up. So for divers who are interested in working with those of us in the corporate team on the lighthouse side, we want to make space for that, right? They could join your team, they could join my team, they could work for Z. Like, we want to make sure that that's an opportunity of growth for them. And then there are vertical and horizontal goals. So if you're an EA2, do you want to become an EA3, an EA4, an EA5? Or do you want to go be a chief of staff 1, right? So do you want to grow vertically within the expertise that you have, or are you looking to go horizontally into another area of expertise? And how are we setting you up for that, right? Really simple things like just writing down what somebody wants, making tangible a dream, makes it so much more possible, right? And that's the place where I think we're going to lean in.
I have a few more questions, but now that you mentioned chief of staff and EAs, I'm going to use this opportunity to quickly be like, can you please explain the difference? Because a lot of our audience always gets confused about like the two different roles. So if you can just give a little explanation about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's anytime you're defining role differences, it's tempting to go to what they do, right? The EA manages your calendar and the chief of staff doesn't. But if I'm really following what I said, it's about accountability. What is the chief of staff accountable for? What is the EA accountable for? I think of business often like a tug of war, right? And there's kind of two pieces to winning at tug of war. One is the constant tension on the rope. You have to, sort of tactically make sure that the other team isn't pulling you forward, right? And then you also need to be able to tug. Yeah. So for momentary bursts, you need to be able to create energetic movement that changes the state of the status quo. So you need to hold the status quo so you're not losing, then you need to pull, right? So that you're changing the status quo. I often think of it as an EA tends to be a holding role, right? They're doing a lot of tactical work to hold the ground that we have, right? And chief of staff is very much a tugging role. Their job is to create slack in a system, right? Where they're really catapulting us forward on a project basis to get us to that next level in an epoch within a business. And so when you then take that and you say, well, what does that result in people doing? If a chief of staff is managing a bunch of process-oriented things, I often think they're being underutilized or misutilized, and those should go over to business operations or some more operational leader, right? And vice versa, if an EA is spending all of their time doing just project-based stuff, then I'll recommend to a client, hey, you might want to think of them more like a chief of staff and find somebody who can kind of hold the line on just the tactical, daily, long-term. If you're doing the same thing day in and day out, you're probably not doing chief of staff work, you're probably doing EA work.
Interesting. Okay. As the Chief Experience Officer, you are going to be, or you are actually speaking to so many people, a lot of people. Like our diver community is about 500 odd, right? So how do you think your background in behavioral science is going to help you with your role as a CXO?
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, we talked about that split in psychology between the clinical, the study of the individual, appreciating Chev as Chev, right? And then the study of what is common between us, right? And I chose that route, that social psychology route. So when I'm talking to people, I obviously see you as an individual. I obviously celebrate who you are, but I'm always looking for, well, where are the threads of commonality that I heard between conversations? And so as an applied behavioral scientist, like, you always want to look for that, like, what's the common factor? Where's the common inhibiting pressure or the common promoting pressure that you then can act on top of? And so when I'm having conversations with people, I love getting to know the divers. I try and spend a ton of time with them. I do all the exit interviews personally. Like, if anybody chooses to leave the company, they talk to me on their way out the door because I want to learn from them. And I always say, if you put on the chief, diver officer, the chief experience officer hat, what would you change, right? I love that part of it, but it has to be systemic. At some level, you have to zoom up from the 500 people and say, well, what can I do to affect the outcomes of all of these 500 people? And that's my job as a leader. We have wonderful tactical leaders who, if Chev, the individual person, needs help, will help them. And I have to trust those leaders that they got the ball on that so that I can do the things that elevate us, that I can do the things that are common, the things that drive us all forward systemically.
Nice. This next question I have, Matt, I think you've sort of answered it with the growth plan that you have for each individual diver, but how do you plan to elevate the employee and candidate experience at Oceans?
I mean, I think that we have to, it's such an interesting thing because Sri Lanka is, it's 23 million people, but within the zone of folks that are ready to work for Oceans today, and again, I say today because I think we need to grow that zone. We need to find ways to work with Sri Lankans of every stripe. Yeah. But the people today, it's a densely networked community. And so one of the things that I really want to do is right now, when we do community management, we really think about the 500 divers that we have, right? I want to add 2 communities to that, right, on either end. One is the population of people who aren't yet quite ready to work at Oceans, but we want to work with them and they want to work with us. We just haven't found a way to do it yet. I call that the lagoon, right? I don't want to fish from the open sea. I want to fish from the lagoon. I want to spend time with the people who have already kind of pre-opted into us. So that's a place where I want to enhance that employee diver experience is, hey, how do we address people even before they work here to prepare them for the experience that they're going to have? The second piece is on the other end, which is our alumni group, right? In the course of 500 divers, we also have divers who have gone on to do really cool things. They've gone to work directly for clients at times. They've started their own businesses. They've moved off, into educational experiences, or they've emigrated, right? How do we keep them involved, in the company? Because they are potential referrers of talent, potential referrers of clients, potential sources of knowledge. They could be mentors. So I want to add more at the beginning of the client experience, right, in the lagoon, and then I want to add some alumni things that really make sure that it's a nice virtuous cycle. Because at the end of the day, every alumnist is a potential future employee, right? They might choose to return here, right? They might, they have a business, they decide they want to get out of that business. They left us because they emigrated, they might come back. Like, I want to create that cycle of talent that as long as their values aligned with us, as long as, they didn't leave on bad terms, we feel they're curious, they're inclusive, they embody what we care about at Oceans, I want to bring them back, right? So I got to add things on both sides.
Lovely. Okay. It's a full 360.
That's the goal, right? We had over the weekend we did a walkathon. So we had about 50, 60, 70 divers show up, and we went for a walk together and then had some refreshments, and it was super fun. And people brought their kids, and I was joking with one of the parents. I said, future diver, right? Like, I want that. I want it to be a family business, not in the sense that it's family owned, but in the sense that you would feel comfortable with your kiddo eventually participating in the ecosystem of work. Because we talked earlier about dignified work, right? And human dignity and its intersection with the workplace. The way I think of dignified work is often, how would I feel about my kid doing my job, right? It's a very neat way of very quickly saying, well, am I doing something dignified? Because if you wouldn't want your kid to do your job, why are you doing your job, right? Like, oh my God, right? Like, that's that moment of like, but if you feel like it's dignified work, you'd be proud for your kiddo to follow in your footsteps. And so that's what I want.
So what does your day as a CXO look like?
Again, it goes back to that autonomous, accountable framework, right? So I spend a lot of time as a thought partner, right? Talking through, well, how are you approaching this? Here's some thoughts about how I might approach it. Like, does that help you, sort of get there? The other thing is, because of the stage of business that we're in, there's always this sort of player coach mentality. And so I'm always looking for slack in the system. I'll give you the great example of like our talent acquisition team. We've had so much growth on the other side of the business. Ian and Austin have done such a fantastic job of helping bring us new clients. We always sort of, have really strong demand on that side. And so, we don't want to have a waiting list. We don't want to push people farther out. So that puts a lot of pressure on this side of the business to perform. So our TA team is 110% all the time, right? On that tug of war, they are just leaning on it all the time. And so sometimes I'll do things that just create slack in the system. So recently, for example, I decided that all of the internal referrals, all of our divers referring other divers, I was going to take on. I also do just tactical work that creates slack in the system. We need to upgrade our data systems, right? We have as happens in the early part of a business, things get put everywhere. We have done a really good job of documenting everything, but it's not all in one place. I'm not asking one of my executives to take on the data migration as a project. I'm doing that, right? I'm creating slack in the system so that 3 months from now, they can just get a little bit more sleep, because it's self-perpetuating, right? If all of my executives are 100% right now, and I make a personal investment to get them to 95, well, then that's a chain reaction. That's a runaway reaction, because now they've got that 5% and they can do the same thing for the people underneath them, and the people underneath them can do the same thing for the people underneath them, right? And so I view this sprint process of me tugging a little bit on the rope as changing the status quo enough to get everybody to 95% instead of 105%.
Lovely. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. Nice. We're moving into the last segment, Matt. I'm going to let you go very soon. This section is mostly to talk about the future of work and oceans, but like on a global level, right? The world of work has been evolving rapidly, as you know, obviously, and the global talent landscape is undergoing transformative changes, like even as we speak. How do you see this global talent landscape evolving over time? Like, where do you think it's going to be in the next 5 to 10 years?
I try not to make predictions about the future because I am notoriously bad at it. The world proves you wrong a lot. And so instead, what I kind of refer back is to the things that we know about humans, right? We know that humans are intrinsically curious, right? We know that humans are intrinsically motivated. We know that we're very powerfully motivated by our connections to other people. And so I think if you take those set of, curiosity, ambition, and then connection to the people around you, it certainly makes a strong argument for flexible remote work, right? Because that combination of flexibility and remote allows you access to opportunities that you wouldn't be able to geographically get unless you moved, right? That ambition piece, right? It allows you to a broader scope of stuff, not just ambitious vertically, right? I can get more money, I can lift my family out of poverty, whatever, but horizontally, hey, I can explore my interests, in the Star Trek sense of the word, I can go explore the universe, right? So I think that remote work supports that opportunity to work across a broader range of roles. And then finally, I think the last piece is just that, it allows people to be flexible, to be connected to the people around them. I have a 9-year-old, and over the course of his life, I've been tremendously pleased with the opportunity to work in flexible environments that mean I get to spend a ton of time with him. We talked about the sort of brutal sleep schedule I have right now. Yeah, it's tough to sleep from 10 to 4 at night and then again from 10 to 12 in the morning. But what it means is I wake up and I pick up my son from school every day. And he gets unrestricted dad time generally, right? From when he gets home to when he goes to bed, right? 2 to 8. So that's just huge. There's no amount of money. There's no, nothing can substitute for that. Its intangible benefit is just massive. And so I think if you look at those intangible benefits and how important they are, it certainly argues to me for a remote, flexible environment. Not for everybody. And flexible means you might want to go in person, right? Co-working is great. I'm here for 2 weeks to see you, right? I'm not saying human beings can live in a box disconnected from the world, but what I'm saying is that flexibility allows you to make those connections in the way that work for your whole set of connections, not just your work connections.
Nice. Let's say, just hypothetically, if the pandemic was completely removed from existence, so 2020, everything that happened in 2020 to 2022 or whatever, do you think oceans would have succeeded even if that wasn't the case and people didn't get used to?
I do actually, because there's this sort of myth that remote work is because of the pandemic, but it's ahistorical, right? As a scientist, you have to look at the evidence, and remote work had been doing a slow but steady progression, basically as long as the technology has supported it. It's been around, right? And so as long as the technology continued to support it, look, was the pandemic transformative in a lot of ways because it pushed us to systems that allowed us to go faster? Yes, absolutely. I'm not denying that in any way, shape, or form, right? But do I think it was solely responsible for that? No, right? I don't think that's true. And I think even without a pandemic, we would have seen the same gradual rise. And in many ways, it's interesting, right? Because there's now this return to office sort of mandate. This we talked earlier about, when you zoom out, things are up and to the right, but when you zoom in, there's lots of recursions, right? Things where it goes backwards. I think we're seeing a recursion right now. Then I wonder if we had just been going slowly and steadily, whether we would have seen this recursive piece where we sort of this giant kickback. So I'm interested to see how it plays out. But as I said earlier, in the rising apes sort of sense, I have to fundamentally believe that the right thing wins eventually. And I do think that flexible work, it's not remote work. We can sort of leave off to the side. The value of remote work is in the flexibility.
Absolutely.
And so I think flexible work just has to win over time because that's what is best for humans.
As the executive team of Oceans, you and Ian and everyone else on the Lighthouse team that you were talking about,
I mean, you're part of the
Yeah,
layers too. So also her.
There's obviously a lot of trends that's happening, like we spoke about in the previous question. How do you think Oceans is going to stay ahead of this curve? Like, what are we doing physically right now to make sure that we don't get left behind?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at like, well, what would cause us to get left behind? I'm not very scared about AI. I think, things are overblown there. I think, AI gets rid of the calendaring stuff that no one wants to be doing anyway, which is great. And it's not what the majority of our divers do, right? Most of our divers do 2% calendaring and 98% operations or marketing or chief of staffing or something else, right? So, it's very rare we have people who are doing nothing but EA work. And I think that is a good sign for us. So if anything, AI is great for us because it just means there's more dignified, interesting work to do that we can then bring to Sri Lanka and divers as an opportunity. So I'm not worried on that sense. What would break us? Well, there's a couple of things. The first thing that I think would break us is if we can't get the operations, shored up, if we can't get to a place where everybody's running at 95 instead of 100%, the reality of any engine is that if you're running at 100%, it eventually overheats, right? And so I take very, very seriously the belief that in order for us to be successful, we just got to get below that red line a little bit, and I think that's in this next epoch really, really key. So one thing is overheating is the place that we could break. There are some structural things about being in Sri Lanka that could break, right? One is that we tap out the talent pool, right? Okay. We go employ all of the Sri Lankans that want to work at Oceans, and the other ones have not yet had the educational opportunities that make it possible for us. The way I'm trying to mitigate that is looking at where can we get involved in training and educational opportunities so that more and more divers are meeting us along the way, right? Can we have a 6-month boot camp, and then people come into Oceans if they don't quite have the skills and they need some intensive things? Can we work with universities across the spectrum or other training programs across the spectrum and say, hey, can we teach a diving class, right, that can get to you, that can get people ready for us? So I think there are mitigations there. Yeah. The other one, we live in a complex international world. I think right now, the relations between Sri Lanka and the U.S. are very good, and I hope they stay good. But I also recognize that we live in a complex world. What's interesting to me, and the best mitigation there is, when you look at those connections between countries and where they often fracture across economic lines, right? And so by being involved in the economic life of Sri Lanka, I think we're inherently also involved in the political life of Sri Lanka, right? In the progression of the United States and Sri Lanka becoming, good and fast allies by intertwining our economic destinies together. And so that part is very interesting to me in terms of, I think we can mitigate anything that might interrupt that connection by making sure those connections are really strong. And I try to invest time in those in the weeks that I've been here. Projects like the Port City project here in Sri Lanka, which creates a special economic zone that, allows us to conduct special business in the country. Even just meeting people, right? Making sure that they're aware of why we're doing this. I think it's so easy to look at companies like ours and think, it's all BPO. Yeah, right? It's the lowest common denominator. It's some job that an American doesn't want to do, so we're going to ship it abroad, and it'll eventually get automated out by AI, because I think the shit work does get automated out by AI, hopefully, right? And it's important for people to understand that is not what we are doing. This is dignified. These are opportunities that an American would be proud to have, right? And all we're doing is going back to Matt Wallaert in rural Oregon and saying, you don't have to leave home to get it.
Lovely. I want you to just look straight into the camera and speak to our audience.
Which one?
Whichever one you want. Oh, well, they've said that one.
They're all pointing at that one. All right. Hello, camera.
Matt, what is so great about Sri Lankan talent? Tell us, in your experience.
What is so great about Sri Lankan talent? For me, this is a country that is so unique in its peoples. I mean, I think a lot of times people look at it geographically and they're like, it just hangs off the bottom of India, and so it must be like India. It's not. It is its own unique flavor. As I've worked across, both with the Oceans team and also the 2 divers that I had before I started at Oceans, what has always stood out for me is their combination of empathy and ambition. A lot of times we think of those two things as diametrically opposed. If you think about, the stereotypical like hard driving white male executive, right? The consequence of that ambition is a loss of empathy. And what you see in Sri Lankans is a beautiful combination of showing how that doesn't have to be true. You can be ambitious and still care about the people around you. You can be ambitious and still want to be a coworker and not a competitor. And to me, I think that's a really special and unique part of Sri Lankan talent.
Lovely. And what advice would you give to candidates looking to work with Oceans and make a global impact?
I mean, if you want to work at Oceans, there are really 4 gates, right? So the first thing you have to think about is, are you values aligned with us? We are an incredibly inclusive workplace. And if you are not able to work with people around the globe from different religions, Sri Lanka is a beautiful melting pot in many, many ways. If you're not able to rise to that, you're not welcome here, right? Curiosity. If you're not curious, and I'm not saying not being curious is bad. It is okay. There are different temperaments in the world, but there are a set of values and temperaments that are successful here. And if you're not curious, when you come to that walkathon on a Saturday and you meet up with all the other divers, you're going to go, wow, you people are not my kind of weird, right? So I think there's a certain set of values that you have to come to. The second one is it the right moment for you to be at Oceans? If you're planning to emigrate 3 months from now, this is not the place to come. If you are in flight school and you're about to become a pilot, a professional airline pilot, this is not the place for you. This is not a temporary job. We want people who are staying 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They're growing with us. And so there may be temporary reasons that we're not right for you. But assuming that your values are aligned and assuming that this is the right time in your life to work at Oceans, then it just comes down to role and level. Do you do something that we have an active market for? Chief of staff, business operations, marketing operations, finance, the place that we tend to play, right? And do you do it at a level that is appropriate for our market? If you are an EA1, we're just not the right place for you. You have to get upskilled a little bit before you can come back to Oceans. And that's where, educational programming and things can help out, but that doesn't make you appropriate for us in this moment. If somebody wants just a super basic level EA, they don't tend to come to us. They're going to go to some BPO outsourcing company. They're going to go into a different market. They're going to look for the lowest common denominator and the lowest dollar. These are premium jobs. They are paid incredibly well. And so you may be values aligned with us. It may be the right time in your life to work with us, but we might not be ready to accept you because you're not at the role and level that's going to allow us to be helpful to you.
Matt, so before we wrap up, quick rapid fire, just 3 questions.
All right.
Okay. If you could give one piece of career advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Pass. No. Take everything less seriously. I started out very serious. I was a serious kid, right? I took work very seriously. I was very intent. And what that caused me to do is pull too hard, right? A workplace is like a rock, right? Tied to a rubber band. And if you pull too hard on the rubber band, the inertia of the rock will snap you back. Right? If you don't pull hard enough, then the rock won't move. But there's this optimal tension where you're pulling people along faster than they want to go, but not so fast that they're uncomfortable or beyond their level of uncomfort. And that's my piece of advice is find the optimal tension, right? Younger self, don't be so serious. Find the optimal tension.
Lovely. Okay, so I read somewhere that you've said the Pacific Northwest is the best place to live. Now that you've visited Sri Lanka, has that opinion changed, or at least is it rocky?
Nope, still the Pacific Northwest. Sorry, Sri Lankans. It's been a very humid, hot week here, and the Pacific Northwest is awesome. If there were job opportunities back home, I would be back there. I mean, every time I go to visit home, the Portland airport doors open up, and the beautiful pine-scented, just insanely fresh air of the Pacific Northwest, hits me in the face, and it just feels like home. Right. Oh. And, some calls to something eternal in me. And it's really core to the Ocean's missions, right? That's why I want people not to have to leave home, because for all the exploring you do around the world, and maybe you find someplace that fits you better, there is something so unique about where you were brought up that nobody should have to leave that behind unless they want to.
I agree. Good answer, so I will accept it.
You'll accept that the Pacific Northwest might be Still be good. All right.
Okay, and last but not least, if you could teleport anywhere in the world right now, where would you go and what would you do?
I mean, I'd be back home. This interview is being filmed right as I'm about to get on a plane. After 10 days in Sri Lanka, I'm going to go home. I'm going to see my partner. I'm going to see my son. I get to sleep in my own bed. I see the dog, right? I am at the end of the day a homebody, right? It's connected to why I work here. It's connected to the mission of being home and keeping people home. And so if I could teleport, I would just not have this 23-hour flight that's looming in front of me, and I would just be home with my family.
Oh, lovely, Matt. Thank you so much for taking the time for being here. It's our first episode. I hope it's a good luck. You're a good luck charm, but we're so excited on behalf of the Sri Lankan team to have you on board. You bring such a refreshing perspective to the work that we've been doing for the past 2 years, and we can't wait to grow Oceans to that 5,000 level that you've been talking about every day since you've gotten here. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing your insights and little tips for everyone. And I'll hopefully see all of you all very soon with another episode of Beneath the Waves. Thank you. If you want to keep updated with everything to do with Oceans and our new roles and vacancies, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and don't forget to like and follow us on all our social media platforms that you see on the screen right now.